Innate helps companies avoid project surprises, make better informed decisions, share knowledge, and deliver better outcomes. Innate, transforming the way the world builds.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us. Now, we haven't got Dale here today. He's decided he couldn't make it, but that's okay. We've got Martin here with us. Martin, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. And yourself?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's bloody cold in Australia at the moment. But
oh, really?
Everything's lovely.
It's been bloody hot in Europe this week. I can see why you guys know so much about air conditioning.
I'm going to have to move back to London, I think. You guys have got better weather than us. But look, let's introduce our guest. Our guest here tonight is going to be talking about something that we both love a lot, which is around planning. Ed Van der Tak, how are you?
Thanks. Thanks for having me here. I'm fine. And at the moment, it's a little bit cooler. And it's evening right now where I am here in the Netherlands. So it's a very good moment to have a chat.
Fantastic. And look, we love this topic we're talking about today. We were just talking before we press record that, you know, this is an exciting area of project management and project delivery. But before we get into the detail, I think it's important we share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, Ed. How did you get into planning and controls and projects? Where did it start for you?
Well, it started when I finished my study. I started working as a cost engineer, and at that point in time, we were talking about 89, 90. Mm-hmm. That's a very long time ago, of course. But that was the first start of computers. And as a kid already, I was very interested in computers. And you might remember the Amigas and the very old ones. And then I started as a cost engineer, and my boss said, "Here you have an IBM." And that one was more expensive than the BMW of my father. So that was my first introduction with computers. And I had the chance to start working with the old days of computer software scheduling packages, and I immediately liked it because I had to program a little bit. I had to create schedules, but also histograms, all those kind of things. And in the beginning, it was about tenders, and over time, it became projects, larger projects, etc.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's incredible. And you know, in particular around planning, I mean, there's something to love and hate about planning for everybody, I think. You know, what are the bits that you don't like about planning when you were a real practitioner?
I started with the turnarounds, and turnarounds are very short periods, about, well, let's say 5-6 weeks or so, with an enormous amount of activities. But actually, I'm not really that detailed scheduler. I mean, I like structuring. I like getting everything in a way that people can use it. But I'm not a detailed scheduler. So that's also one of the things I still like to create schedules, but it's not my main activity anymore. So that's one of the things, but. Yeah, and I don't like to make schedules for as a nice picture on the wall.
I don't know if you saw, Ed, but we have this LinkedIn page, and usually once a week we send out something to debate, because in our community, as you know, we don't always see eye to eye, which is great because discourse is great because we have different perspectives and different viewpoints, and you know, we're all adults here. Mm-hmm. I had a question go out there. Remember this one, Martin? It was the alternative to critical path method. And it's been one of the long-standing debates in planning. And it blew up, Ed, and I'll definitely share it with you after this podcast. But one of the real challenges is you know, critical path method is the standard norm on big projects, in particular construction works, and mining projects, etc. But is there an alternative in your view? And where do you stand on that debate?
Well, it's very interesting because I'm currently thinking about complex projects and complex being chaos, with chaos theory in mind, which means that you cannot work on the critical. There's no critical path. There might not even be relationships and those kind of things. So how do you create schedules when relationships are not known, etc.? And we start, and that's something from the last, well, maybe decade, that projects become more complex. The standard type of relationships which we know or used to know or still use, they become more fuzzy. And I agree on the fact that we should be able to create schedules in a different way. But in general, I think in basics, CPM is still valid. I mean, there are a lot of activities which still can be used in that way. So it's a little bit, it's a difficult discussions, but the discussion is also based on the things you do, in which markets do you operate, etc. So
yeah, I always felt it was context related. So and we had this idea of, well, I didn't have this idea, but someone did, about rolling wave planning, which I've never seen really work properly, but the concept was really logical. It made sense to me. You don't know everything in the future, so don't plan so hard, basically. And work on the things that you do know, the things that you can plan out properly, which is the things that are in the current window. And I thought, that's a great way to plan, because therefore CPM is still valid. But I get your point as well. These mega projects, and particularly in Australia, I don't know if you know, Ed, we've got so many infrastructure projects going in parallel. One of the challenges isn't just around how do we deliver, but materials, logistics, people, skills. We've got a number of variables that are impacting the way we deliver, and that makes it even more complex. So not only can we not tell you when we're going to finish, we can't tell you how many people can do that job, because again, some of these roles, particularly in rail, are very specialized, and there's only a small number of those people that can do that job. So I think for everyone who's listening and was in that debate for the CPM piece, it's still undecided, and it's contextual depending on the types of projects that you're in. Would you agree with that, Ed?
Yeah, I agree, and it's also the development of techniques together with the help of software, with even artificial intelligence, and maybe we can talk about it later. But it also brings up the issue: to what extent, in time, like you say, rolling wave, to what extent can we use standard techniques, and when do we get over to different techniques? And it reminds me actually on the same discussion about a project being unique. And I had this discussion last week. Someone said, well, I can't do that because every project is unique. I said, well, each project is a unique combination of standard activities or standard steps or standard methodologies. It's all about the combination of things that might be standard, and that makes it unique. So
yeah, there was something published, I think, by Bent Flippberg around that, the biases of projects, and one of them was this uniqueness bias. And they use that as a almost an excuse to validate themselves from not conforming to the standard, when I was always taught that the scope is the part that is the unique part, because you're delivering something unique with the scope, but everything else is pretty standard. And so I always got a bit confused about why we thought we were so special, and that we could diverge from so many different standards and depart. And it actually builds up more problems as you go in the project. You end up almost tripping over yourself because you've gone so far away from any types of standards that you're trying to get back to them. Do you find, and I don't know what the Netherlands is like, have you worked anywhere else? Have you seen different styles and different standards in different countries, or you think it's company related? Where do you think this issue of non-standards or this uniqueness bias comes from?
Well, that's. I think it comes back to the our personal idea of being unique. We tend to look at the world as something which we can't grab. I mean I think that's a general idea. There must be something unique to me. There must be something unique to the area I live in, etc. But if you widen your view, and I've been in the Middle East, and I've been in various other European countries also for work, and there are differences. That's clear. But still, if you go back, if you cut it up into smaller pieces, into even smaller, etc., you come up with the same values. So when I was in the Middle East, I felt as being in an area which didn't feel as Europe or as the Netherlands. But then you talk to people and you find they have the same ideas and the same values, and they like the same music or those kind of things. So I think it's the same within our project and project management discussions. So cut it up into smaller pieces, and you will find that a lot of those pieces are actually the same. And then you can start measuring them, and then you can start building your methodologies on them.
What have been the big changes in planning in your kind of 30 years experience, other than the obvious like technology? Has there been a big shift in the last 30 years? And we mentioned artificial intelligence. What have been the big movement, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I found out that up till 2000, you saw that it was a lot about the tools and the techniques, and then it turned, because everybody started talking about soft skills, and I found it very hard. I mean, maybe I even thought about I had a fight about it, not real, of course, but I came into a lot of discussions, and then I think a few years later I found out that, well, they might be right. I started to understand why they talked about soft skills. But then I think it was 2008, 2009, 2010, and that period, everybody started talking about the computer sciences, which is more hard, of course, and the use of software, etc. So it turned, and it balanced, so to speak. But it had a use, in my opinion, to talk about soft skills, because the project world had become too much of a hard-skilled environment. So when you went to a seminar or you went to an event, it was all about the software. So we needed something to make it a little bit more soft. But then the techniques developed, and your computer and your software developments went so hard that it became again valid to start using those things. And that's one of the things I found out, that, well, it became a balance of hard and soft skills as per 2010, 2012.
When you say that soft skills, is that in terms of how you're getting your data, how you're presenting it to people, how you're interacting it, or is something else?
Yeah, exactly. Interacting and talk about the team. So getting the right people on board became more important than using your software right, or your tools right, so to speak. And I always said, well, if you have a very nice person, but he doesn't know how to set up a work breakdown structure, or he doesn't know how to control his project, or he doesn't know how to report financials, etc. So, well, that's still a little bit hard to get to a good result, a good project. and it wasn't that they didn't say that it was not important, but the focus on soft skills was so high that everybody who came from school said, well, I don't, if I want to become a project manager, I only have to be a smart person.
Do you think there was any cultural biases in there? I can see in your profile you've kind of worked in the Netherlands and Middle East, so quite direct direct places, maybe compared to Britain,
well,
and USA, maybe.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of cultural differences because of, for instance, that in the Middle East they value knowledge. So that's one of the things to show other people that you have your knowledge via certificates, for instance. And the Dutch have, from already maybe a long time, they have something just act normal. So I think it's becoming more standard to get a good degree, of course, etc. But in general, the idea was from, well, it's nice that you have a good piece of paper, but that's not the most important thing. And that's changing, of course. I'm talking about maybe 20 years ago or longer, but those kind of things are changing. That's right. So there are many cultural differences, but again, I see a lot of very eager and also knowledgeable people around the world everywhere. And so it doesn't matter which. I had good discussions also with people from the Middle East or from India or whatever, all kind of places.
And do you think that balance is going to shift almost back the other way with artificial intelligence? Is it, the machine's doing the intelligent part in theory?
I think that's also a very good discussion, because what's the use of artificial intelligence? Why do we need artificial intelligence? And I believe that one of the reasons is that it makes people with less skills and maybe even knowledge even more successful. So if decisions are made by AI systems based on something you do, then you have that tool, and then you are able to do a lot of projects with the help of those systems and still be successful, even without your experience, even without certain knowledge. So what does it bring to us is that people with, well, I don't want to underestimate it, but with less knowledge and less skills or experience are able to do successful projects.
So do you think the role of a planner will become someone who's having to use this technology more? I think I know where you're going with this. Maybe you could have changed the question to what's the point of a planner in a few years' time? Do you think planning will become more specialized in a few years' time, or do you think there's a risk of it becoming more generic and the machine?
I sometimes and I to tease people, and as I say that my role in this area is now to get the planner out of the equation, and that's I try to tease people with that one, because what if a system can build the schedule? I mean, why do we need planners? So one of the reasons I say that is because even planners, but that's with a lot of other professions also, have to think about what am I going to do in 5 to 10 to 20 years. And they become more analysts. They become more, have to start working integrated again. They have to come up with the right questions, because the answers are coming from the systems. That's let's take that as a starting point. So what are the questions? What do I need to have those questions answered, etc.? So
you touched a great point, because I've been saying this, Ed, for a long time. I was teasing as well when I talk about planners being made redundant, because, you know, no one wants to know that their profession or their vocation is not going to be useful in the future. And I would say the same thing. I think we had a presentation at the Project Controls Expo where we mentioned this, what is the future of some of these roles? And I did challenge project controls and planning, because, and what I did was I tried to dissect the two, because I think there's a very important role they play. But I would argue that the transactional work that used to be a large part of their role would be automated, would not require their input. And you look at some of the tools now that are out in project management. You look at NPlan, Analysis, and a few of the others, Nodes and Links, that are using machine learning. They're either probabilistic or deterministic. They're allowing you to be a little bit more of it's more of a Q&A presentation, you know, a bit of a survey. Do you need this? How many of them do you need? So they're extracting the subject matter expert information, and then they're coming up with the work breakdown structure. They're coming up with the methodology that would deliver that project based on the types, the environment, the variables. I think there's a very exciting part of planning. They'll actually rise above it. You know, they become the froth in the beer. They decide that actually I can do a lot more value adding by bringing people on the journey. Because my question, which is a great segue, thanks Martin, is really about the translation issue between the value of planning and the wider project community. So if you think about on a project, not everyone likes or gets planning. You know, they tend to kind of box them in or isolate them. Planners have a lot of in my experience, Ed, have a real challenge, you know, articulating and explaining the program. And this is where planning comes into it. I think there's a big element. You mentioned soft skills. I think there's a big element around storytelling. I think good planners that I've met are excellent storytellers. They understand the audience that they are trying to convey a message to. They break it down. Sometimes they're writing with crayons, you know, crayons are, but to make it as simple as possible for the audience so they can consume the information slowly. Because if we all go out with big metrics and say everything's doomed and it's all red, then, you know, we can do that, and that's a lot of fun, but it doesn't drive the right incentive for change with planning as the mechanism. So in your experience, because you're in consulting now, I know this probably happens to you a lot, the value of planning. What's your methods of conveying the value?
Well, I think that in general it's about, like you said, it's about the value. I mean, in general terms, it's about the value. So planning is just a supporting role and a supporting skill to add value to the project. And that value is not only at the end of the project, but also before the project starts and during project execution. And like you said, the storytelling, that's a good point. And planning and schedulers should tell a story not only with the Gantt charts. I always say that if you present a schedule without the story, without the piece of text, without the idea, the plan in essential, but also where do I need to make decisions? That's one of the other things. Which activities or those kind of things. There's a complete story around a schedule, not only the way it's set up, but also the way it should be used, or how we execute the project. And I think that a good planner needs to know that story. So he needs to know a lot of more than only setting up a bar chart. But the other element is that he has to come in his analysis, in his way of working. He has to approach the schedules from different angles. So, what is the cost impact? What risks are obviously more and more a major topic, but also looking at risks. Not only what are the most risky or the biggest risk or the top 5 risks, but how do they develop? How can we solve them? Is there an alternative? All those kind of things. So you should be creative. You should be a puzzler. You have to like different to solve the puzzle, so to speak.
Do you have any preferred planning visuals or metrics? We had Santosh Bhatt on about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he was talking about time location charts, which Val and I are completely sold on now. They're brilliant. Yeah. Do you tend to focus on the story, or do you try and focus more on visual pictures? Bit of both?
A bit of both, depending on the issue. I've created also the time location charts because it's also depending on the project itself. But time location charts could also be used to if you have documents, for instance, and if you turn the location into the different stages of the documents, for instance, then you also have a possibility to tell the story of the development of a document in time. So, and that's the creativity, which I mean. You have to be creative in using the different tools and different possibilities. And one of the things I did, for instance, is I created the project control cube. And that's an augmented reality cube. And the augmented reality cube, this is a podcast. I would love to show it to you, but it's...
you can show it to us if you want.
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah,
of course.
Just a second.
No worries. We love show and tell. It's our favorite part. There we go. Look at that.
So this is a cube, and for the listeners, it's a cube with on each side a element of project control. So money or cost and risks and the planning and the resources, etc. But also a location. I can't actually show you the augmented reality part because you need the app, and it's only on my iPad somewhere. But what happens if you look through the app to this cube, you can look inside the cube, and it has a 3D effect, so a depth. You can look into that cube. Now, let's think of a project, and then you see the project on the map, and you can zoom in and zoom out inside the cube, and then you can look at the cost, and you get a cost curve of that project, and maybe you can see the risks, etc. I can send you, by the way, some pictures maybe afterwards. We can add it to the podcast. And it's what happens is that you might think I get the same presentation on a website or so, but your brain is different. I mean, getting interactive with this cube means that you are triggered by different things, by colors, by depth, by 3D, etc. Well, my next idea is that you get into the cube. So imagine yourself inside this box. It sounds a little bit, you also always want to think outside of the box, but I say go into the box. And now you're in the box and you look in front of you, you see the schedule. But if you look on top of you, you see the risks hanging above you. And then on the right side, you see the cost, and on the left side, you see your resources. And now the schedule develops, and you see all kinds of things running around you, changing, etc. And suddenly there's something red above your head, and then you push the stop button and have a look and play back, etc. When I did that, I thought, hey, this sounds like my my location. Right? I had a room when I did the turnarounds. I had a room with all my schedules on the wall, and on this wall were the schedules, and those guys were the graphs, etc. And actually, it's Obeya. If you look at if you talk about lean, etc., it's the Obeya room, but then in an augmented reality version.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice, well, the thing is that we all have our mobile phones, we all have an iPad or those kind of things. So we have the tools to start using different techniques and different ways of presenting data. And I find that very interesting.
You've got fans in us. I mean, we talk about, and with a lot of guests actually, Ed, in this space. I don't know if you've heard of Eddie Obang and the work that he's doing. He's in the virtual reality space. So he's actually got like training facilities but similar, right? Where you go into a room and on the left, there's location or information documentation. On the right, there's a whiteboard. Everyone has their own bot. So there's a representation of the person. And in fact, as Project Chatter gets involved, we've got our VR gear. We're actually doing a metaverse podcast in the next couple of weeks or months. And that'll be very exciting because I think you're right, Ed. I think that, and you coming back to the point that you said, and I think this is key for everyone listening, is creativity. There is a very easy chance that you went into process or planning because you like structure and you enjoy, systematically building things out like that. And so maybe for some people, it may be a bit of a challenge to challenge themselves creatively. This is not something that your manager is going to be able to do for you. Mm-hmm. Just to get the ball rolling, because we're going to get into this topic, and I know Martin's got some questions. What's your creative process, Ed? Because obviously you're a planner by trade. How do you get into the zone, into the box, outside the box? I don't know which one, but how do you get into that creative space where you come up with things like that cube, which was remarkable?
Well, one of the things I don't know, some things I can't answer, of course, because I get up in the morning and then I have a brainwave. But the other thing is about reading, and one of the things I was interested in was the effect of the brain. So in my training, I use a clip from the BBC, Masters of Time, which is a documentary, and it's in this clip you see that the fly has a higher frequency with his eyesight. His frequency is about 3.5 times the frequency of human, which means that he can slow down. His time is different for a fly. And that means that catching a fly is much more difficult, because for him, we are really slow movement. We move slow. But actually, even between people, there's a difference. So children have a higher frequency than adults, and people older have a different frequency also. So there are some differences, which means that perception of time is also different between ages, or even between man and woman. But it's also about the situation. And so reading is one of the things, and then you come up, but it starts with the interest. I mean, you want to know something, and then you start reading a book, or just browsing on websites or whatever, just to find an answer to, well, maybe a question you had in mind, or something you saw or just want to know.
You and I are very similar, Ed, I think, because I read a lot, but I don't necessarily have answers. But then I'll be in the shower, or I'll wake up in the morning, have a coffee, and I usually have very small books around me. They don't make sense to most people, but to me they do. And I'll just write it down. And I think there's something in not necessarily even having a question, but the absorption of knowledge is useful because it gives your brains alternatives, which is great. And it's one of the most wonderful things about books that I don't think will ever change. Even if you're reading online, it doesn't change. But
No.
The consumption of other people's ideas is something that we can do as humans, which is great, to add to our own collective knowledge. And then that changes the way we approach problems and solve them. Yeah. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, that's right. And start with being curious. And if I coach planning and scheduling engineers also, and one of the things I always say, by the end of a meeting, you should ask a question. So during the meeting, you have to think, which question am I going to ask by the end of the meeting? It does two things. First of all, you have to listen very carefully, because maybe something happens. So it's focus you on listening to other people. If you have to ask a question by the end, but asking questions is also one of the things it triggers new ideas. It triggers interests, etc. Asking a good question is, I think, one of the major things we don't do that too often.
Is that something you'd recommend for people joining the planning industry in 2022? Is it, focus on the technology, understand the technology, where it's going, or is it focus on building stuff, reading, asking questions, that kind of softer skill, or a mixture?
Well, it can be combined, of course, but maybe it's a little bit depending on your interest. If you're interested in building a railroad, you can start asking about how do you build a railroad? I mean, very, very simple. And then start asking, well, if I know the steps, how do I put that into a schedule? And what's the best software package or whatever? So keep on asking those questions.
I think that's big, because people are probably choosing now to join planning. They're not, starting out in engineering and moving into it. Most of us and most people we've had on have fell into project controls and planning roles, but people are actually choosing to do it now from college, university. So it's important to have those skills and a knowledge on top of understanding of how a Primavera works and how to push a few buttons. It's that real core knowledge. And
I also believe that. I don't know if you have the same experience, but if you're really interested in something that some other person does, they're always willing to tell you the story and give you the information. So if you show that interest, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's about planning and scheduling or about building a bridge or whatever. Just show the interest and start asking questions, and maybe even one question, and then you don't have to say anything. I mean, if you have a good question,
yeah. I used to love doing that. Wait till the end of the meeting. Be very quiet, listen, actively wait, and then just ask one really powerful question, and it could be enough to bring not even an answer, maybe just the right viewpoint. And you go, well, we'll take that on notice, but that's a really good question. I think questions are the way. And I was just thinking of your cube then. Where is the future of that in terms of the ability to ask great questions? Is there a point where you think that cube, you could ask questions as you go into the box, as you said, and ask a question about risk, and then it goes into this explosive view and it provides you based on your kind of input?
Well, I recently I've thought of 4 Ds, the letter D, and the first one is data. So that's obvious. I mean, we're talking about machine learning, etc. So data. But the second one is dilemma. I have a problem. It's called I have a dilemma. So I want to solve that problem with maybe data. Do I have the right data, etc. Those kind of things. But after data, you get dilemma. And then the next one, the first one, is decision. So if I have a dilemma, I need to make a decision. And I don't have one direction. I always have a number of scenarios, probably. But I need to make a decision. And after the decision, I'm going to do something. So doing or so. And I thought, well, I think in the near future or in the future, there's one entity, it's maybe AI, taking all those steps. from data to dilemma to this decision to even the execution, so doing. So it could be, for instance, that a building which is now being built by persons, it's being designed by an AI system, then it's going to be executed by the AI system in the whole execution phase. But the question is, what is our role? It's probably making the creating the dilemmas, or asking about the dilemma. What is my budget, for instance, or what is the size of the area, or those kind of things. That's the dilemma, but the system needs to give us a decision. And then, well, also recently I thought, well, it's a little bit like the Deming circle. So it's for data, dilemma, decision, doing, and then from doing we get new data, and you're going on and on. So it's I have to give it a name. Maybe it's a Van der Tak circle, but I don't know.
Yeah. It sounds great. I think there are some similar ones, but they all come back to one point, and I think this is the challenge with planners is, you know, a lot of people talk about AI and machine learning, and then you go on some of these projects. I'm not sure what the Netherlands is like, but in Australia or the UK, we're still grappling with the first D that you mentioned, data, and how do we control, support, share. We've got some really great people doing some great things, trying to share that information and get more awareness around what we call data custodianship. Martin Paver in the UK, he's kicked off the project hackathons. They're really good to check out as well, Ed, from a creativity perspective. But it's really underwhelming, I think, when a lot of people come on projects because they want to do something that includes, you know, augmented reality cubes, and they want to go into that world where everything's futuristic. You know, the Star Trek version of projects would be great, but the appetite for it has stopped at some level of management, and therefore the sponsorship of anything that remotely creative in that space. And I get it, it could be a risk if you think about investing on projects while they're running. You know, any novel idea has some kind of impact. It might not necessarily be favorable either, because you'll make mistakes as you go. That's the whole maturity process. How do we get around that? Because you almost need like an R&D type organization to go and get involved. That used to be the government. We don't have a lot of that here in Australia in terms of full investment in how projects can be done better. And then you see, I don't know if you know Bent much and what he publishes, but you know, consistently we are failing projects across the world in a really epic way. You know, they make headlines, they're in the news for the wrong reasons, and I'm just wondering, how do we bypass that layer?
Yeah, well, I think there are a number of approaches, of course. One of the things I currently see is that a number of energy companies and infra companies, etc., are really already working on collecting data. They're collecting data in their standard activities, or maybe even in their tooling. So with a combination of a robot with a machine, or collecting data on machines, etc. So there's a lot of things are going on, but they are if you're in a project, in many situations you don't see it, and the larger the project gets, the more it becomes it becomes sometimes out of the organization. So for instance, the infrastructure project right now is the biggest one within the organization I work right now. I'm on the client side, so that their focus will probably be on the maintenance projects, for instance. That they're all small projects, etc. So they're easier to collect data in a more structured way. So that's one of the things. But the other thing is that, as an example, I always say, I have a lot of data about my car, for instance, and I have a lot of data about my home, and I have a lot of data of my parking. I have a parking app, for instance. I use my parking app, and I put my car outside the office. I get in, get out, turn my parking app off, so I finish parking, and I have my time registration system in my parking app. So we have to think of creative ways where we already are entering data, or which collects data, and we have to start using that without being typing again, entering the same information. And if we, even on a project, if you bring those information sources together, you can start with building a data structure. I mean, that you need to get some experience in it, but you have to start simple. If you have a schedule, and if you have your cost, and if you have your hour bookings and your document system, etc., and if you start combining those kind of things, it won't be perfect in the beginning, but you could see the integrated relationships between all those kind of things. And with doing that, you can show to management that you are creating value. Maybe even on the basic level, but that's how it has to start.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned 4D, but in a different context. What's your views in 4D, like model-based planning? Have you had a lot to do with that? Is that something that's been taken up in the Netherlands?
It is, and it's already a very long period, because it started with a SketchUp. Do you know that the 3D
Yeah, I used to use it. Yeah.
system, those kind of things? So I played around with it. I even had some experience with. We did the infrastructure, a railroad track. And you might know from Microsoft Sims. So they have a real how do you call it, train sim. And if you looked at that tool, it had a kind of XML upload and Xload, and you could actually there were people who already designed the track from The Hague to Amsterdam, so a real situation, and then you can use your train, and then you only had to say it has to go from A to B, and the game software already contained a lot of the information you needed. So I tried to use that as for the test track of one of the projects, and I think that gaming together with AI, together with building, etc., that's one of the things we might be able to start using in the future.
Yeah.
And I have some experience with it, but I didn't go into a full-fledged work with. And that's one of the things I said in the beginning. If I go in deep, and then I want to go very, very deep, so I have to restrict myself sometimes because I have so many other interests.
Yeah, we're very similar. We're very similar in the fact that, you know, it is a rabbit hole, and you can go very deep on these subject matters.
That's right.
But you know, with that idea of gamification, I think you're right. You know, if Oracle is listening, Oracle, fix your software, because I think with some of these planning tools, they've just not changed at all, and you know that to its benefit and to its inability to adapt. You know, you're seeing these other competitors in the market, which is a good thing. Again, we want competitors in the market, and you're seeing what they look like. And I've even got projects, I don't know if you know Monday.com, but projects that are going to very, very simple views. One, because they're aesthetically pleasing. I'm sure that's a part of it. Two, they're very simple to use. And three, there are some intuitive parts of them. So you can switch between, let's say, you're a Kanban view, a task list, a Gantt chart with one flick of a button, you know, a resource profile. And what you're realizing is that the value is in the intuitiveness of the software. And therefore, you don't need as specialized planners in that space. Where you need specialized planners are obviously in these more detailed programs, but you need them as that integrator role rather than the people that pull these things together. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we're too far away. I did ask someone from Deltec, just to dob in some names because I can. I said, what does the future of software look like, Ed? And I would love to get your point of this at the end. And I said, I believe, and I challenged them, I said, I believe software will one day just be a white canvas, and the software will talk to you and it'll ask you what you want, and it'll base its predicates on what you say and what the industry is, what the sector is, what the value, etc., what are the constraints, and it will build it. And it'll say, right, here's your cost element, here's your contract element, here's your doc management tool, here's this, here's that, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's not too far away. But I was challenged counter from Deltec because I think there is a market still in having enterprise suites that don't talk to each other. They're getting better. Like you can see Oracle's got Unifier and all these other Deltec tools have got a way to integrate with tools that aren't native to themselves. But where do you see the software platforms moving to? I know we say AI, but more specific than that, what do you see them doing?
No, I think your idea of a blank canvas, that's right. It's more like a chatbot then. It's all about questions. The system is going to ask you the questions. What's your budget? What's your what do you want to build? How's the size, etc. And then it starts building those kind of things. And actually, I talked to a French startup. And they are working from that perspective and building up from templates and then copying what we used to call the small library activities, fragments in the past. And then they use those fragments. And then you say to the system, how many pumps do we have? Well, I have 6 pumps. Okay, then take that fragment, multiplied by 6, etc. So from that way, it builds up a complete schedule or even project plan and those kind of things. And I think like a project plan, there are a lot of systems already that can transfer a few words into a text in a whole story. There are examples right now from something you have to type in a text and you get a picture. You probably have seen a 3D system. I forgot the name, but it means that I say I like a chair with in the color of an avocado, or etc. That's an example they have, and then you get a picture of a chair in the shape of an avocado, but not one. You get many of them, and you can choose it and make it for. And you probably have seen something like MetaHumans. So I need a person with a woman or a man and with long hair, etc. And the system creates it for you. Well, the same applies for apartments, for instance, a room being decorated with, etc. And I enter text, and the system gives me a picture. And that's going to be the same with our project execution. And then it's going to build it.
Is there a risk that we do start to lose this specialism in planning, or is it just getting rid of some of the grunt work where you're having to create the thousands of lines when you're setting up a program? Okay, the boring stuff, and we could focus on the interesting stuff. Or is there a risk that the machine does all the intelligence and humans just have to push a few buttons? Is that a risk, or is that a good thing?
Why do you call it a risk?
Well, no, that's an open question. Is it a risk? Is that progress?
I think that's progress. That's one thing. I think the risk itself is not the system doing that, but the fact if what do we get back from it? A few years ago I would say creativity. So that we lose creativity. But even systems now provide solutions which are much more creative than humans. So the shape of a building or the shape of etc. So and we couldn't create those structures because of their complexity. But now we can solve the complexity. We can create a structure which I think 10 or 20 years ago was impossible. So do we lose creativity, etc.? I don't know. It brings us, I think, in first of all solving real problems. I think that should be the focus, not a more beautiful bridge or those kind of things. That's nice, I think, of course. But I think that our real intention should be to solve some big problems in energy, in waste, prevent waste or those kind of things. So we have to, and that's. At the beginning, I also said our projects are going to change. So we're going to get into more complex projects to solve those problems. And there we need the systems. So the complexity of the projects we go into, the problems we have to solve, well, we need more power, so to speak. So I think that's one of the ideas probably.
Yeah, Ed, we hear you. I think we've had a few guests on talk about responsible project management, and I think younger people joining planning now want to be part of contributing to the environment and things that are responsible to our community and sustainable, not just work on big projects. So you find that that's definitely the trend across the world, I think. Look, we've gone through an hour so fast, but we do have a time for a little bit more, what we call a pop quiz. I'll pass on to Martin to introduce it.
Okay. Thanks. So yeah, as Val said, it's a little pop quiz, 5 quick fire questions, all about yourself. So if you're ready, we can make a start.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Question 1. What's your one piece of advice for people new to the project management profession?
Ask smart questions and show interest. I mean, that's one of the things you learn by getting answers by people who you show interest in.
Nice. Number 2, best planning software.
Best planning software. Your own brain, probably.
Oh, I like that.
Nice.
I heard that one before.
That is
good. Next, what would be your book recommendation to our listeners?
I started with Time, so that's it's actually called Time from Stefan Klein, and it completely explains how the brain works. And I know it's off topic. It sounds like an off topic, but perception of time, like I said, with the fly, etc. That's really our behavior and our priorities, etc., are within that piece of gray matter between your ears. So understanding why people do things they do, I think that becomes more important in the coming years.
Definitely been learning those soft skills, haven't you?
Yeah.
Next, favorite planning metric.
I would say think about float, but keep your float in mind, and see how it is affected by resources and those kind of things.
Good advice. Yeah. Last one. If you had your time again, would you go straight into planning, academics, data analytics, AI, engineering?
I think it would be AI. Yeah.
Yeah.
The future of our profession with with more skills in that area. That's right. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks a lot.
But I still have a few years to go. So that's.
We hope so, Ed. Well, Ed, it's been a massive, interesting conversation and good questions from both of us around what we could do for the future of planning. Ed, any final thoughts from you for our listeners?
Yeah, I think also if you're in the field of project management or you want to become a part of that, get a good education, but in general, try to get a lot of experience in different areas. So don't stay only in one area, because different areas use different techniques, have different problems, etc. Which I tried to do a lot of things in the beginning. Don't stick around in only steel or infra or those kind of things.
Yeah, great advice, Ed. Martin, any final thoughts from you?
No, I really like the comment about be curious and keep asking questions. The best planners are the ones who are the most curious and ask the right questions. And it's good advice for anyone at any point in their careers, not just young early careers people. And yourself, Al, what's your final thought?
I will have to come back to you. I think there's a lot of food for thought, but I love talking about technology in the future of planning. I think this is something that Ed and I and Martin, I think, agree largely on. There is a lot around creativity, and I think that's the key point and takeaway for me is be curious and have a look at how you can be more creative on projects, because we need new ideas to make them better. Look, that's all we have time for, folks. If you like what you heard, you can pay it forward or by sharing a link to our episode or on our social media. A massive thank you again to Ed Vandertuck. Thank you for all listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me and Martin, it's bye for now.